shy receptionist greeted the billionaire's deaf mother, but what she said in sign language left him madly in love. She was just the shy receptionist, quiet, overlooked, invisible, until the day the billionaire's deaf mother walked in, and no one knew how to greet her, no one, except Clara. With one graceful movement, she spoke, without a single word. What she said in sign language stopped the room, stopped him, and in that silent moment, he fell madly in love. But now everyone's asking, what did she say? In silence. That changed everything. Before we continue, if you enjoy touching and inspiring stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Now, let's get back to the story. You shouldn't speak to her. She won't understand you anyway. The words cut through the air, cruelly casual, like someone brushing off a fly. A ripple of laughter followed, not loud, but enough to sting. Clara's hand froze mid-gesture, the shy smile on her lips wavering as the roomful of executives turned away from the frail old woman in the wheelchair, as if she were furniture. It was a Friday morning, 9:10, and the Langston & Wells penthouse office was flooded with natural light, glossy with power and pretension. Crystal chandeliers gleamed above Italian marble floors. Every man wore a suit that cost more than Clara's rent. Every woman clicked by in heels high enough to scrape the clouds. And Clara Monroe, the soft-spoken receptionist who always packed her own lunch, had just done something nobody in the office dared. She greeted Victor Langston's deaf mother in fluent, heartfelt sign language. Victor stood 3 meters away, tall and unreadable, the CEO everyone secretly watched and openly feared. His presence made people straighten their backs and lower their voices. At 30, he ran a multi-billion-dollar empire like it was a chessboard, but now he was frozen. Clara hadn't seen him approach. She'd been too focused on kneeling gently beside Mrs. Langston's wheelchair, smiling at the woman whose pale, elegant hands trembled slightly, from age, not from weakness. Clara's own hands had moved gently, gracefully, as if she weren't just communicating, but offering dignity. "Good morning, Mrs. Langston. I hope you had a peaceful ride. You look lovely today." Simple, respectful, but in that room, it was as if she'd spoken an alien tongue. "Why would she learn sign language?" someone whispered behind a coffee mug. Another scoffed, "Probably saw it in a movie." And then Victor stepped forward, not loudly, but with the kind of stillness that silences a room. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He watched. Clara's cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from the shame others should have felt. She rose slowly, stood straight, small in frame but unshakably poised, and looked Mrs. Langston in the eyes one more time. The old woman smiled, wide, radiant, and she reached for Clara's hand. A quiet beat passed between them, only broken by the sound of Victor's voice. "What did you say to her?" It wasn't angry. It wasn't soft either. It was the kind of voice you answer carefully, deep, sharp-edged, with something dangerous just beneath. Clara turned, heart pounding. She could barely meet his eyes. They were storm-colored, intense, watching her like a man trying to solve a puzzle that was suddenly personal. Clara swallowed, then answered, calm but quiet. "I said she looked lovely today." Victor blinked once, slowly, then glanced at his mother, whose face was still glowing from the unexpected kindness. And then, to everyone's shock, including Clara's, Mrs. Langston signed something back. Victor's eyes shifted between the two women. Clara translated softly. She said no one said that to her in months, not since her husband passed. The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble. Clara looked at the floor. She felt the heat rise in her chest, creeping up her neck. She didn't mean to stand out. She never did. She just couldn't bear the way people acted, like the old woman didn't exist. And now every eye in the building was on her. What about you? If you had to choose between being invisible or humiliated in public, what would you do? Comment below. Victor stared at her, unreadable. His mouth opened slightly, as if he might say something. But then his assistant, cold and sharp, stepped between them. "We're running late for the investor call, Mr. Langston. We need to leave now." Victor didn't move. Then finally he said one word, low and deliberate. "Clara!" She looked up, startled. "Join us." The room gasped. Even Victor's assistant stumbled. "Sir, she's the receptionist." Victor didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. His mother, grinning quietly in her wheelchair, held Clara's hand tighter. It was decided. In the elevator, no one spoke. Clara stood at the back, painfully aware of her thin dress and borrowed blazer, surrounded by $1,000 suits. Mrs. Langston looked calm. Victor stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes occasionally flicking toward Clara, like he was trying to unearth a memory he didn't know he had. When they reached the top-floor boardroom, the assistant pulled Clara aside. "I don't know what game you're playing," she hissed, "but don't get comfortable. He doesn't keep girls like you around." Clara flinched. She wasn't a girl like anything. She was someone who loved books, who stayed up late learning sign language online so she could someday volunteer at the community center, who spent weekends baking for neighbors who never said thank you. She wasn't playing a game. She was just being kind. The meeting began. Clara sat quietly near the coffee tray, dutifully taking notes, though no one asked her to. Victor opened the discussion, sharp and commanding. But something in him had shifted. He kept looking toward her, not often, not obviously, but enough. And when the meeting broke for lunch, Mrs. Langston, defying her son's assistant, insisted on having her meal in the smaller lounge. With Clara. They shared a modest tray of chicken salad sandwiches and chamomile tea. Clara gently unwrapped a homemade shortbread cookie from her purse and offered it. Mrs. Langston smiled, signed slowly, "You remind me of someone. A long time ago." Just as Clara was about to ask who, the assistant barged in, red-faced. "Mr. Langston needs you, now." Clara followed her down the glass hallway, heart thudding. Had she done something wrong? Victor stood at the far end of the corridor, near the window overlooking the city skyline, back to them, hands in his pockets. "Come in," he said without turning. Clara stepped inside the room, which smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen. He turned slowly, held something in his hand, a small carved silver locket, old, elegant, engraved with a lily. He looked at her. She said, "It's yours now." Clara stared at the silver locket in Victor Langston's hand, her breath caught somewhere between her ribs. I don't understand," she said, barely above a whisper. Victor didn't blink. He stood tall, composed, one hand in his pocket, the other holding the delicate oval pendant, like it weighed more than it should. "She said she wants you to have it," he repeated, gaze unwavering. "Told me to give it to you before I had time to argue." He opened the locket gently. Inside, a faded black and white photograph of a young woman, poised, serene, with the same delicate eyes as Mrs. Langston, and a pressed lily. Pale and paper-thin, pressed against the curve, Clara's voice trembled. "Is that her?" Victor nodded. "Her mother?" He closed the locket carefully and held it out. Clara hesitated. "This isn't something I can accept." "She doesn't give things away lightly," he said, his tone low, "especially this." Clara slowly reached out, fingertips brushing the cool silver. A strange flutter stirred in her chest, like something old and sacred had passed to her, unspoken. But as soon as her fingers closed around it, a sharp voice pierced the room. "She's manipulating you!" They both turned. In the doorway stood Helena Clark, the company's chief communications officer, sleek, commanding, and every bit as poised as Clara was soft. Her heels tapped a warning against the marble floor as she stepped closer. She's been here, what, 4 months? And now suddenly she's bonding with your mother and walking out with heirlooms. Clara's hand flew back. I didn't ask for... I know exactly what you didn't ask for, Helena cut in. Eyes narrowed. But I know girls like you. Quiet, pretty, harmless, until they aren't. Victor's jaw tensed. Enough. But Helena didn't back down. You know how this will look. You think the board won't notice the receptionist suddenly getting gifts from your family, or that investors won't... I said, enough? Victor's voice dropped into steel. Clara had never heard it like that. Low and lethal. Even Helena's breath hitched just for a second. I'll handle it, he added, quieter now. Then he turned to Clara, softer somehow. Go take your lunch break. Clara walked back to the lounge with the locket clutched in her hand, like she was afraid someone would rip it away. Mrs. Langston had fallen asleep in her chair, her chin resting lightly on her shawl. Clara sat beside her in silence, laying the locket gently on the table. Outside, rain had started. Light at first, then steadier, casting long shadows against the window. She opened her bag and pulled out the second cookie. The shortbread wasn't fancy, just something she made on weekends when she missed home. She nibbled quietly, then broke off a piece and placed it on a napkin for the older woman in case she woke hungry. There was something comforting in the silence. When her shift ended, Clara tucked the locket inside a silk handkerchief and left it in a drawer at the front desk. She wasn't ready to wear it, not yet. She didn't take the elevator down with the others. She waited until the lobby cleared. As she passed through the security gate, she heard someone call her name. Softly, hesitantly. Miss Monroe? She turned. It was one of the junior interns. Barely 20, nervous and wide-eyed, she held out a small bouquet of peonies, not perfect ones, but fresh enough to blush. This was delivered for you. Clara blinked. Me? She nodded. There's a card. Clara unfolded it slowly. You didn't have to speak, but you did. Thank you. VL. She held the card for a long moment, unsure what to feel, and then, without meaning to, she smiled. The next morning, she wore a new blush-pink blouse. Nothing extravagant, just enough to feel a little braver. She tucked her hair back with a pearl clip and kept the locket safely in her bag. By 9 a.m., the office was buzzing again. Whispers had started about the flowers, the elevator invite, the locket. Some looked curious, some jealous. Helena looked livid. Victor hadn't arrived yet, but Clara had a sense, the kind that grows when someone has looked at you and truly seen you, that today wasn't the end of what started yesterday. At 9:14, the doors to the executive suite opened. He walked in, tall, flawless, unreadable. But this time, when he passed the reception desk, he didn't walk by. He stopped. And in front of everyone, all the assistants, all the onlookers, even Helena peeking around the corner, he asked her, Clara, do you know a place nearby with good coffee? And just like that, the room froze again. Her heart skipped. There's a cafe across the street. It's small, but I've got 20 minutes. He tilted his head, faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Would you join me? She felt eyes on her from every direction. She could hear them whispering. What is she doing? Is this a test? He never takes staff to coffee. But something in Victor's gaze said this wasn't about a spectacle. It was about her. They walked side by side into the rain, both quiet, both pretending not to notice the rumors forming behind the glass windows. The bell above the cafe door jingled softly. They sat in a corner booth, ordered 2 coffees. She chose chamomile instead. There were no bodyguards, no assistants, just the 2 of them, and a quiet moment in a city that rarely gave them. I looked up your file, he said after a while. She stiffened. She. No scandals, he added. Not even a parking ticket. Just a handwritten note from your former supervisor calling you the kindest person he ever worked with. Clara looked down at her cup. I'm not trying to get anything, she said. I know. A pause. I didn't expect you, he admitted. What do you mean? He looked at her. long and soft. I thought I had everyone figured out. The rain tapped against the windows like a metronome, ticking down the minutes of their strange, quiet coffee date. And then, just as Clara was about to respond, his phone buzzed. He frowned, checking it. And then, his face changed, his jaw tightened. Something was wrong. He stood abruptly. "I'm sorry, I have to go." She stood too, instinctively. But before he turned to leave, he paused, his eyes locked on hers one last time. She never gave that locket to anyone, not even me. Then he was gone. She sat back down slowly, rain still falling, tea growing cold. She reached into her purse and held the silver locket in her hand. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew this much. Something had started, and nothing was going to be the same again. The office felt different after that coffee, not louder, just sharper. Like everyone had turned the volume down on their phones, but turned up the gossip in their eyes. Clara had barely stepped through the glass doors when she felt it, the quick glances, the half-finished whispers that died when she walked past. Even the security guard, Mr. Danton, gave her a strange look, halfway between curiosity and concern. And behind the front desk, where she always felt safest, was a single cream-colored envelope, no stamp, no label, just her name. Clara Monroe, written in elegant cursive. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. A single sheet of embossed stationery slid out. "Please come to my suite at noon. There is something I would like to discuss in private. Elizabeth Langston Victor's mother." At 11:55, Clara stood outside the private suite reserved for the Langston family. She smoothed her blazer, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and knocked twice. "Come in," came the soft voice from inside. Elizabeth Langston sat by the window in a room bathed in natural light, surrounded by orchids and quiet elegance. She looked more alert than yesterday, her silver hair pinned neatly, her eyes brighter. Clara greeted her in sign language. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Langston. Thank you for inviting me." The old woman smiled. "Call me Elizabeth," she signed. Then, slower. "And please, sit." Clara sat carefully beside her, palms folded in her lap. For a moment, the silence was peaceful. Then, Elizabeth reached for something on the table, a photograph in a silver frame. She handed it to Clara. It was a young woman in her 20s, vibrant, laughing, holding a violin. "She was my daughter," Elizabeth signed, her eyes distant. Clara looked up, startled. "I didn't know you had—" "She died when she was 25, car crash. No one saw it coming." Clara's heart tightened. "She was like you," Elizabeth continued, "quiet, soft-hearted, always trying to fix people with kindness." Clara swallowed. "I'm so sorry." The older woman waved a hand gently. "She would have liked you, I think. She would have seen what I see." Clara looked at her, unsure. "And what is that?" Elizabeth didn't answer right away. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside, legal documents, a draft of her will. "I want you to be my companion," Elizabeth signed carefully. "Not a nurse, not a caretaker, a presence, someone who sees me." Clara's hands trembled in her lap. "Me? But I'm just the—" "Receptionist?" Elizabeth's brow lifted. "So was I. Once." That made Clara pause. Elizabeth smiled. "I told Victor this morning. He's uncertain, but he listens when he needs to." Clara looked at the open folder, then at the woman beside her. This wasn't just about tea and kind words. It was something much deeper. By the time she returned to her desk, Helena was waiting. She perched on the edge of the reception counter like a cat ready to pounce. "Busy morning?" she asked sweetly. Clara nodded, trying to pass. Helena didn't move. "You're aware that family entanglements with junior staff are against company policy, right?" Clara blinked. "I'm not entangled with anyone." "Of course not." She leaned in. "Just be careful. Sometimes when powerful people show interest in girls like you, it's not always kindness. Sometimes it's boredom." The word stung, but Clara didn't flinch. Maybe, she said quietly. Or maybe it's because someone finally treated them like a person. That night, Clara walked home in the drizzle, her shoes soaked, her shoulders aching. But tucked safely in her coat pocket was a small velvet pouch. Inside, the locket, and in her inbox, a new email from an unknown sender. Subject, thought you should see this. Attachment, a photo. Clara hesitated before opening it. Her breath caught. It was her and Victor seated in the cafe from yesterday, mid-conversation, smiling faintly, faces too close. Zoomed in, cropped, captioned. Guess we know how she got the promotion. Her stomach dropped. She looked around her tiny apartment, quiet, dim. The heater hummed. Outside, car horns and footsteps blended with the rain. She sat on the edge of her bed, eyes still fixed on the photo. It had already been forwarded to the company-wide gossip chain, Langston Leaks, as they jokingly called it. She could feel it beginning, the spiral, the same one that had followed her when she tried to stop a manager from yelling at the janitor at her last job. The rumors, the shifting eyes, the anonymous comments. She knew how this played out. Only this time, she wasn't alone. She opened a fresh email window. To Victor Langston. Subject, photo. Mr. Langston, I believe this is already circulating. I didn't ask for attention, nor did I expect it. I hope this hasn't affected your mother. If you'd prefer I step back from the companion arrangement, I understand. Clara Monroe. She didn't expect an answer that night. But 10 minutes later, her phone buzzed. One new message. Do not step back, I'll handle it. V short. But for the first time, it felt like she wasn't the only one standing in the storm. The next morning, Clara came in early. She wore the lily locket, and a new look in her eyes. Not defiant, just steady. She poured herself a cup of the office coffee, bitter, over-roasted, but comforting in its own way, and returned to the desk, ready for whatever came next. Helena walked by with a smirk, but before she could speak, Victor entered and stopped right in front of the reception desk. Clara, he said calmly, I need you in the conference room. Her heart skipped. She stood, unsure. He added, just loud enough for others to hear. There's a matter of internal communications I want to clear up. Together. When Clara stepped into the boardroom, the air was 10 degrees colder than the hallway. Victor stood at the head of the long table, his suit immaculate as always, but his jaw was clenched tighter than usual. Beside him, his chief of legal, an older man with kind eyes and a clipboard, gave Clara a gentle nod. Helena was already seated, arms crossed, smirk sharpened, flanked by two communications advisors who were clearly expecting a show. Sit, Victor said softly to Clara. She obeyed, eyes wide, back straight. Let's address it, he continued, turning toward the screen behind him. With a click of a button, the now infamous photo appeared. Him and Clara at the cafe, smiling too softly, sitting too close. The caption hovered beneath it like poison. Guess we know how she got the promotion. No one spoke. Then Victor did the unexpected. He sighed and smiled, just slightly. First of all, he said, voice smooth and deliberate, I paid for the coffee. That got a few chuckles. Even Clara blinked. Then his tone shifted. Secondly, he continued, Clara Monroe is not in any promotional process, nor has she received any special treatment. My mother requested her presence. That was her decision, and hers alone. Helena opened her mouth, but he raised a hand. She has also requested Clara as a companion, and has asked that I formally adjust Clara's title and compensation to reflect that role. The advisors exchanged surprised glances. She will remain in a neutral position with no direct reporting relationship to myself or any board member. If there are concerns about optics, I'm open to compliance oversight. He turned toward Clara, and for a brief second, only she saw it. The flicker of warmth beneath all that armor. But I will not tolerate slander, and I will not punish decency. The room stayed still for a moment. Then the legal counsel spoke, adjusting his glasses. "Thank you, Mr. Langston. I believe that was clear and appropriate." One of the comms advisors added, "We'll prepare an internal note reinforcing that message. It's a good look. Frankly, speaks well to your values." Helena didn't speak, but her silence was loud. Victor glanced at her, then said without turning back to Clara, "Would you mind waiting for me outside?" Clara nodded and stood, quietly slipping out the door. As it closed behind her, she felt something lift off her chest. She wasn't used to being defended. It felt like breathing in after being underwater too long. In the corridor, she leaned lightly against the wall. A junior assistant passed by, holding a tray with 2 matcha lattes and a slice of banana bread. "Want some?" she whispered to Clara, glancing around. "I always order too much when I'm nervous." Clara smiled. "I'd love a bite." They sat for 5 minutes in the break alcove, splitting the bread, laughing quietly about the Langston leaks thread and how half the staff believed Victor had a secret twin. "Honestly," the assistant said between bites, "if he is secretly dating someone, I hope she's nice to his mom." Clara sipped her tea, cheeks warm. "I think he wants someone who understands her." The girl tilted her head. "And do you?" "I'm trying." When Victor emerged from the boardroom 20 minutes later, Clara was back at her desk, typing out the daily schedule like nothing had happened. He stopped beside her, leaned in slightly. "Do you need a moment?" he asked. "Fresh air?" She looked up, surprised. "I'm okay." He hesitated, then offered a rare smile, small but real. "She wears it," he said quietly. Clara blinked. "Sorry?" "The locket. You wore it today." She touched her chest instinctively. The silver cool beneath her fingers. "I didn't think I could, but then I remembered what she said, that her daughter would have liked me." Victor's expression softened. She would have. So would my father. There it was again, the glimpse beneath the surface. Victor Langston, the man with the bulletproof reputation, had cracks in his armor, and they weren't weak points. They were windows. Later that afternoon, Clara was sorting mail when an envelope slid through the slot with no return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single typed sentence. "Careful, Clara. Not every fairy tale ends with the girl keeping the necklace." She stared at it. No name, no clue. Just a warning. She slipped it into her desk drawer and locked it. She knew the truth. Fairy tales didn't end in castles. They ended in trials, and she was just getting to hers. That night, as she walked out of the building, Victor's car was idling at the curb. The driver stepped out and held the door. "I'm walking," Clara said politely. "But thank you." Victor lowered the window. "I just thought, since it's raining?" She glanced at the sky. It was, but softly this time. She leaned toward the window. "I'll take the walk," she said with a smile. "Sometimes it's good to feel the rain." He nodded once, eyes never leaving hers. And then, just as she was about to turn away, he added, "Clara?" "Yes?" "You didn't get this job because of my mother." She tilted her head. "I know." "You got it because you saw her." A pause. "And I see you." She walked home with the locket steady against her chest. Somehow, the rain didn't feel cold at all. 2 days passed, no more rumors, no more mysterious envelopes, but silence had a way of humming, like something just outside your field of vision, waiting to step in. Clara kept her routine. Coffee at 8:10, desk neat by 8:45. Victor's daily schedule printed and placed by 8:59. Small smiles, warm eyes, no mistakes. But that morning she caught something unusual. A black and white photograph left on Victor's desk, folded halfway, unlabeled, faded by age. At first she thought it was a family portrait, but then she looked closer. Her heart stilled. The woman in the photograph, dressed in a simple blouse and skirt, standing beside a grand piano, looked exactly like her. Same hair, same eyes, same tilt of the head. Only this woman was from another time entirely. "May I?" Victor's voice broke her focus. She jumped slightly. He was standing just behind her, 2 coffees in hand. "For you," he said, offering the smaller cup. "Chamomile?" "With a dash of honey," he said, almost shy. She took it, her fingers brushing his. He noticed the photograph in her hand. Something shifted in his expression. "I thought you might see it." Clara swallowed. "Who is she?" Victor walked slowly around the desk and leaned against the edge, his gaze distant. "My grandmother. Her name was Lily." Clara blinked, like the flower on the locket. Victor nodded as if reading her thoughts. "She died long before I was born, but the resemblance to you is uncanny. She looks—" Clara hesitated, then said softly, "Like she would have listened to people no one else did." Victor's lips twitched. "That's exactly what she did." He took a sip of his coffee and added, "She was deaf too." That hit harder than Clara expected. Suddenly, the locket felt heavier around her neck. "Was your mother close to her?" "They were everything to each other," he said. "Until the accident. Lily was 19. She drowned in a boating incident. My great-grandfather kept it quiet. Said it would ruin the family's reputation." Clara felt a chill. "Your mother still talks about her?" Victor nodded. "Calls her the quiet rebel. Said she used to sneak out to sign language poetry readings. Can you imagine?" Clara laughed softly. "Actually, I can." He looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them. Not flirtation, recognition. As if he was starting to believe something impossible, that life gives you echoes, and sometimes echoes come back as people. Back at her desk, Clara placed the photograph inside a folder and tucked it safely into her drawer. Not out of fear, but reverence. That afternoon, Elizabeth requested tea in the garden terrace upstairs. Clara brought the tray herself. Chamomile, shortbread, and the little cloth napkin she always kept in her bag. Elizabeth smiled when she saw her. "You look tired," she sighed. Clara nodded. "It's a different kind of tired." Elizabeth tilted her head. "People watching you?" "All the time." Elizabeth sighed and took Clara's hand. "Wear the locket on the outside tomorrow. Not for them, for you." At that moment, a soft voice interrupted. "Mother?" Victor stepped onto the terrace, blazer off, sleeves rolled up, looking for once like someone who had permission to relax. He froze when he saw Clara holding Elizabeth's hand. Then, slowly, he smiled. "Mind if I join?" Elizabeth gestured to the chair beside them. They sat together, the 3 of them, sharing tea, passing cookies, not saying much, just sitting in that rarest of luxuries, unjudged company. But just before sunset, as Clara stood to leave, Elizabeth signed something to Victor that Clara couldn't fully catch. He answered with a nod, serious, almost sad. And Clara knew, without being told, that whatever they'd shared that afternoon was a goodbye of some kind. That night, Clara walked home through the city's golden dusk, the photograph still in her mind. She passed a violinist playing on the corner. He wasn't perfect, but he played like someone who'd loved and lost. She paused, fished into her purse, and dropped a 10 into his open case. He looked up and whispered, "Thank you," she smiled. "You remind me of someone." When she reached her apartment, another envelope waited. This time, hand-delivered. No threat, just a short typed note. "I saw the resemblance too, but she died young, and that scares people. Firtabaduri, a friend." Clara stared at it, then at the photograph, and then carefully she pinned it on her small corkboard, right beside a note that simply read, "Listen closely. The world is louder than it seems." The next morning, Victor walked through the front doors at 9 sharp. and for the first time Clara stood to greet him. She wore a soft white blouse, her hair tied back with a pearl pin, and the silver lily locket resting visibly over her heart. Victor stopped, looked, and said, as just loud enough for her to hear, "Good morning, Lily." Clara blinked. He froze. "I meant Clara," he added quickly. Sorry, that came out." She smiled. "It's okay," she said, then softer. "Sometimes I feel like I knew her too." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and walked away with a small, secret smile. Friday morning arrived with a peculiar kind of stillness. Clara noticed it the moment she stepped into the building. No whispers, no side glances, just quiet, as if the office was holding its breath. At first, she thought she'd imagined it. Then she saw the flyer, elegant script, pinned to the staff bulletin board beside the elevators, Langston and Wells Annual Charity Gala. Saturday, 7 p.m., black tie. Washguns, Langston Estate, strictly by invitation. She blinked. That explained the silence. This wasn't just any company gala. This was the gala, the one whispered about all year long. The night when socialites, CEOs, and political names waltzed through the Langston Estate in gowns and cufflinks worth more than most salaries. Staff rarely got invited. Receptionists, never. But when she got to her desk, there it was. A sleek ivory envelope, hand-addressed. Miss Clara Monroe, personal guest of Victor Langston. She didn't open it right away. She stared at it, pulse ticking like a metronome under her skin. Then came the voice she'd half expected. "Well, I suppose Cinderella is going to the ball." Helena Clark. She was holding a black folder, smile razor sharp. "You should be careful, Clara. Victor likes his projects temporary. You're charming now. But once the glitter fades..." Clara's fingers gripped the envelope. "Some people only see glitter," she said softly. "Others see grace." Helena arched a brow. "What a lovely little line. Did Elizabeth feed you that?" "No," Clara said, standing a little taller. "Lily did." Helena's smile froze for half a beat. Then she laughed. "Not kindly." "Well then, let's hope you don't end like her." The words haunted Clara all morning. She barely touched her tea. Her fingers fumbled over the keyboard more than once. By noon, Victor appeared, as if summoned by her silence. He leaned over the desk, ignoring the gawking assistants pretending to read memos nearby. "You got the invitation," he said. "I did." "You don't have to go." Clara looked up. "Is that your way of saying I shouldn't?" "No," he said, serious now. "It's my way of saying, if you walk into that room, you become part of a story you didn't ask for." She hesitated. "Am I already in it?" His gaze met hers. Steady, unapologetic. "You've been in it since the day you signed to my mother." Later, Elizabeth called for her. They sat in the private lounge, sharing chamomile tea and warm buttered scones. Elizabeth seemed stronger that day, wrapped in a shawl with threads of gold woven through the soft gray. She was already dressed for the gala, in her own way, elegant pearl earrings and a soft silver brooch shaped like a lily. "You're going," she sighed. Clara nodded. "I was invited." Elizabeth reached for her hand and signed slowly. "You don't have to dazzle. You just have to be still enough for the truth to shine through." Clara's throat tightened. Elizabeth leaned closer and added gently, "And don't let Helena near the wine." That made Clara laugh, really laugh, for the first time all week. That night in her apartment, Clara opened the invitation properly. Inside was a note in Victor's handwriting. "I don't care if you wear glass slippers or sneakers. Just come." And taped inside was a tiny pressed lily, the same kind from the locket. Her heart fluttered. The next day came too quickly. By 6 p.m., Clara stood in her bedroom staring at herself in the mirror. She wore a deep forest green gown, simple but perfectly cut, borrowed from a neighbor who used to work in costume design. Her hair was swept back into soft waves. The locket lay over her heart like a promise. She looked older, not in years, in grace. The Langston estate was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Gothic iron gates opened to a sweeping driveway lined with lanterns. Dozens of luxury cars lined the entrance. She stepped out of her cab with shaking hands and wobbly knees, but when she reached the steps, Victor was waiting. He didn't wear his usual graphite suit. Tonight, he wore a midnight black tuxedo with a velvet lapel and no tie. His collar was open, just enough to show he was human. His eyes swept over her slowly. "You clean up well," Clara smiled. "You don't look so intimidating tonight." He offered his arm. "Give it 5 minutes." The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and wine glasses. A quartet played a soft waltz. People danced, smiled, judged, whispered. Victor led her to a quiet corner where they could observe unnoticed. "You don't have to dance," he said. Clara tilted her head. "Do you want to?" He paused. "Yes." She extended her hand. "Then let's do something people don't expect." On the dance floor, time slowed. Victor's hand was firm at her back. They moved in sync, surprisingly graceful. Her nerves melted as they spun under the lights. For a moment, she wasn't the receptionist. She was just Clara. And he wasn't the CEO. He was just Victor. Until the song ended, and someone called from the edge of the floor, "You really think she's her, don't you?" Everyone turned. Standing there, holding a champagne flute like a sword, was Helena. Smiling, drunk, dangerous. "You think the universe sent you a second chance wrapped in silk and sign language?" Victor's eyes darkened. "Helena? No, let's be honest," she said, stepping closer, voice carrying. "You didn't mourn Lily. You buried her in legend, and now you're dressing up the past in green satin and calling it fate." Clara felt the eyes again, burning. Victor's hand tightened in hers. "Leave. Or what?" Helena's voice cracked. "You'll fire me? Tell the board you replaced strategy with fairy dust?" Victor stepped forward, but Clara stopped him. She turned to Helena and spoke softly. "You can mock me. You can doubt me, but don't confuse love with legend." "I'm not trying to be anyone." She touched the locket gently. "I'm just trying to honor her." The room was still. Helena's smile faltered, and Clara stepped back beside Victor, who looked at her like she'd just changed the weather. "Let's dance again," Clara whispered, and they did. Even as the whispers stirred again, even as Helena stormed away, they danced. Because the only story worth being in was the one they were writing now, together. The gala ended in whispers. Clara left quietly just after midnight, escorted to a private car while the last of the champagne flutes clinked and the quartet began its final song. Victor had offered to ride with her, even insisted, but she'd declined with a gentle smile. "We don't need to rush the ending," she'd said. He understood, and watched her drive away with something unreadable in his eyes. Monday arrived like an aftershock. The morning meeting was tense, polite, measured. Victor led it, as always. Crisp suit, sharper words, but Clara noticed something behind his eyes. A quiet absence, as if his thoughts were somewhere else. When the meeting ended, he barely glanced at her, and by noon it was clear he was avoiding her. Clara didn't chase, but her heart ached in that dull, heavy way only silence can cause. The kind that presses behind the ribs and won't leave you alone. So she did what she always did when she needed grounding. She visited Elizabeth. The older woman was in the sunroom, hands folded in her lap, a shawl draped over her shoulders like armor. Her smile lit up when she saw Clara. "You danced?" she signed. Clara nodded. And then something shifted. Elizabeth's fingers slowed. She studied Clara for a long moment. "He's afraid." "Of what?" Clara signed back. Elizabeth didn't answer right away. Then slowly, she reached behind her chair and handed Clara an old envelope. Inside was a letter. Dated 10 years ago, it was addressed to Helena Clark. Clara blinked. From who? Elizabeth signed 2 words, "My husband." Clara read in stunned silence. It was a short letter, full of pain, full of regret. Helena, I cannot acknowledge you publicly, but know that I always saw you. I wish I had been braver. I wish I had told Elizabeth, please don't hate her. Clara's hands trembled. Helena had been his mistress, or more than that? Elizabeth watched her closely, her eyes calm but ancient. Victor doesn't know, Clara whispered aloud. Elizabeth shook her head. He thinks Helena is just a loyal executive. She's family, Clara said slowly. She's blood. Half, Elizabeth corrected gently. And bitter. Clara sat back, the weight of the truth settling in her chest. That's why Helena hated her, why she'd lashed out. It wasn't about Clara being a receptionist, or even Victor's attention. It was about a life Helena was never allowed to have. And Clara looked too much like someone who had been loved openly, not in secret. Later that afternoon, Clara returned to her desk, trying to act normal. Victor passed her twice, said nothing. By 4 p.m., she decided she couldn't take it anymore. She knocked on his door. He looked up from his desk, startled. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. He didn't answer for a beat. Then nodded. "Close the door." She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, stood still. "You've been quiet," she said gently. Victor leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His eyes were tired, shadowed. "I thought giving you space was the kind thing to do. I didn't ask for space. You shouldn't have to defend yourself in front of strangers at a party." "I didn't mind," Clara said. "You did?" He looked at her then. "I minded because I know I've started something I can't take back." She stepped closer. "Is that regret?" "No," he said. "It's fear." The word hung between them. Victor stood slowly, walked to the window. The skyline was painted gold with sunset. He crossed his arms, not coldly, but protectively. "My father wasn't faithful." Clara didn't speak. Victor continued. "I spent my whole life watching my mother carry that shame with grace, and watching the world pretend it never happened." He looked over his shoulder. "I'm not him, but I carry his name, his mistakes, his shadows." Clara stepped forward. "You think being seen with me makes people see him in you?" "I think I'm afraid to deserve happiness," Victor said, turning, "because every time I've reached for it, I've broken something." He paused, then added, quieter, "And I don't want to break you." Clara's breath caught. She took a step closer. "You haven't," she whispered. "You couldn't?" A pause. Then he said, "But Helena could." She blinked. Victor walked to his desk and opened a drawer, pulled out a letter, the same one Clara had read. "I found this in my mother's belongings yesterday." He handed it to Clara. She didn't flinch. "I know," she said. Victor stared. "She showed it to me." His jaw tightened. "I should have known. I should have realized why why she's the way she is." Clara placed the letter gently back on his desk. "You've spent your life protecting everyone else's dignity. Maybe it's time someone protected yours." He looked at her. And for once, in that room of polished wood and expensive silence, he let himself soften. "Clara," she waited. "I don't know how this ends." She smiled, small but certain. "Maybe we don't have to." And then she did something braver than she'd done in weeks. She reached for his hand and held it. Just then, a knock at the door. Helena, eyes red, posture stiff, one hand holding a manila envelope. "I think it's time we all had a real conversation," she said. Victor tensed. Clara didn't let go of his hand. Helena stood in the doorway like a storm held back by the weight of her own secrets. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped inside Victor's office with the envelope clutched tightly in her hand, like it might burn her if she let go. Clara didn't flinch. Victor said nothing. The air felt thick with history neither of them had asked for, but both were born into. "I'm not here to start a war," Helena said finally, her voice low, rough. "I'm tired of fighting ghosts." She placed the envelope on Victor's desk, then looked at Clara, not with contempt this time, but something quieter, something sadder. "You've seen the letter," she said, "so I suppose the rest shouldn't be a shock." Victor moved first. He picked up the envelope, slid out the contents, a birth certificate, a faded photo, and a will. Not their father's, their grandfather's. Victor's brow furrowed. This was never filed through the estate office. "No," Helena said, "because your father buried it, along with the truth." She turned to Clara now, her voice softening just slightly. "I'm his daughter, your father's. My mother was a pianist at one of his fundraisers in Marseille. It wasn't a fling, it was years, but she was never worthy of the Langston name." Clara stood perfectly still. "I never wanted his money," Helena continued. "I wanted acknowledgement, a seat at the table." "You got one," Victor said. Cold again. "I earned one," she snapped. "But it wasn't the same, and we all knew it." Her voice cracked, just once. "You and I were in every room together, and you never even asked why I hated you." Victor's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. "I didn't hate you because you were the heir," she said. "I hated you because you were loved." That landed like a bell in the quiet. Then she turned back to Clara. "And then you came along, and I saw it in his face, that same softness I was never given, the way he looked at you. I couldn't take it. I wanted to shake you, to pull that locket off your neck and scream that you hadn't earned any of it." Clara didn't step back. She stepped forward. "Then why are you here?" she asked gently. Helena's mouth trembled. She looked exhausted. "Because I read the letter again, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt grief." She looked at Victor now, really looked. "I don't want to carry this anymore." Victor didn't respond right away. He set the envelope down. "You could have told me years ago." "I didn't think you'd believe me," she whispered, "and part of me didn't want you to." Victor looked at Clara, just briefly, as if grounding himself in the one person who'd never worn a mask. Then to Helena, he said, "We'll deal with it legally. And, privately, you'll get what you should have always had." Helena's eyes filled, but she nodded. "That's all I ever wanted." She turned to leave, hand on the doorknob, then paused. "I don't think I'm cut out for this company anymore, but if it means anything, I hope he loves you differently than he loved anyone else." She left without another word. Victor stood in silence. Clara crossed the room, rested a hand lightly on his arm. "She carried it too long," she said softly. "She shouldn't have had to," he murmured. "None of us should." He turned to her. "I think I need to see my mother." They found Elizabeth in the garden conservatory, wrapped in a shawl of ivory wool, sipping tea with a touch of lemon. She smiled when she saw them, then paused, reading their faces. "You know," she signed to Victor. He nodded. "I always knew," she signed back. "I just couldn't face it." Victor knelt beside her chair. "I'm sorry, Mother." Elizabeth placed a hand over his. "Don't be. Grief clouds some truths, but love brings them back." Then she looked at Clara. "Will you pour the tea, dear?" They sat together in the warmth of that sunlit room. Victor, Elizabeth, Clara. And somehow, for the first time in decades, the Langston family felt whole. No pretense, no positioning. Just people, with wounds and a willingness to stay anyway. Clara poured the tea carefully, letting the steam rise like a silent offering. Victor sat across from her, something soft and human returning to his features. Elizabeth sipped, eyes closed for a moment. Then she opened them and said, aloud, her voice raspy but firm, "Tell her?" Victor looked startled. "Tell her what?" he asked almost too quickly. Elizabeth smiled faintly. "You're a clever man, Victor, but not nearly as subtle as you think." Clara glanced between them, heart quickening. Victor hesitated, then turned toward Clara, searching her face. "I'm not ready," he admitted, "but I'm certain." Clara nodded. "You don't have to be ready," she said. "Just honest." And with that, she reached for his hand again. No dramatic music, no declarations, just fingers brushing in the soft light of reconciliation. That evening, Clara returned home with a quiet heart. No headlines, no scandals, only a single handwritten note waiting on her doorstep, folded once. No envelope. "Thank you for not being the girl I expected. I hope someday I can be the woman you see in me." Helena Clara pressed the note to her chest, then looked up at the stars blinking faintly through the city haze. For the first time in a long time, everything felt possible. Not perfect, but possible. And that was more than enough. It had been nearly 2 months since Clara Monroe walked into Langston & Wells as just the receptionist. Now she was something else entirely, still quiet, still soft-spoken. But something had shifted in her presence, in the way people looked at her. Like they'd started to realize that kindness wasn't weakness. It was strength, polished through pain. And yet, with everything unfolding, Victor's tentative love, Elizabeth's warmth, Helena's slow retreat, there was one part of Clara that remained closed. Her past. On a gray Tuesday just after lunch, Victor passed her desk with a curious glance. "Clara," he said, "can I ask you something?" She looked up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Of course." "I realized something this morning," he said, his tone light but honest. "You've learned everything about me. My family, my past, but I don't know anything about yours." Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "There's not much to know." Victor raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a deflection." She hesitated, then replied quietly, "It's more of a boundary." He didn't push, but later that day he left something on her desk. Not a gift, not flowers, just a note. "When you're ready, I'd like to know where you come from, even if it's messy, maybe especially then." V. Clara sat with the note for a long time after closing hours. Then, slowly, she reached into the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a folded map. On it, a small town marked in red ink, Greenville. The next morning she told Victor she needed a few days. He didn't ask why. He just said, "Do you want company?" She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. They left the city on a Thursday afternoon. No driver, no entourage, just Victor behind the wheel of a silver SUV. Clara in the passenger seat, and a thermos of chamomile tea between them. The drive was quiet at first, but not uncomfortable. Clara kept looking out the window like she was watching memories walk by on the roadside. Eventually she spoke. "I was raised by my grandmother," she said. "My mother left when I was 6. No father on record." Victor didn't look surprised. "She ran away?" he asked gently. "Not exactly," Clara said. "She just stopped showing up." A pause. "She said I was too quiet, that I made her feel invisible." Victor gripped the steering wheel just a little tighter. "My grandmother taught me sign language," Clara continued. "She worked at a school for the deaf. She said silence wasn't something to be feared, it just had to be translated." Victor smiled faintly. "She sounds like a poet." "She was," Clara whispered, in her own way. They arrived in Greenville just before sunset. It was small, sleepy, the kind of place where every house had a porch, and every porch had a story. Clara guided him to the edge of a quiet street. There, nestled between 2 oak trees, was a little white house with a blue door. It looked tired, but still standing, like her. "This is where I grew up," she said softly. Victor stepped out, took it in. "I didn't imagine you here," he admitted. She smiled. "Neither do I." Inside it smelled like old wood and lavender. There were dust motes in the sunlight and books stacked on every surface. Victor walked slowly, respectfully. Clara reached for a photograph on the mantel, a small frame of her grandmother holding her as a toddler, both of them laughing. "She passed 5 years ago," Clara said, "right before I moved to the city." Victor watched her carefully. She'd be proud, he said. She'd be suspicious, Clara laughed. Of you. He grinned. Smart woman. That night, they shared a simple dinner. Tomato soup, grilled cheese, the kind of meal that didn't impress, but comforted. Victor ate every bite like it was a Michelin dish. This is better than anything in my fridge, he said. Because it was made with actual bread, Clara teased. He laughed, not the polite kind, the real kind. And that's when she told him, my real last name isn't Monroe. Victor looked up, surprised. I changed it when I left Greenville, Clara said. My mother's last name was Calder, but I didn't want to carry it anymore. He didn't ask why, just nodded. You chose your name. I chose myself, Clara replied. Victor leaned back in his chair, watching her with something deeper than admiration. Gratitude, because she was showing him something he'd never demanded, her real story. They sat on the porch afterward, listening to the crickets. Clara wore an old cardigan. Victor, just his shirt sleeves rolled up. The stars were brighter out there, more honest. She sipped her tea, then asked softly, Would you have liked me then? Victor didn't hesitate. I think I would have needed you then. Clara smiled, but he wasn't finished. He leaned closer, just slightly, enough for her to feel his breath. I still do. She looked at him, long and quiet, then said the words that had been building for weeks. I'm not someone who needs rescuing. I know. I'm not polished. He smiled. You're real. I'm scared. So am I. She paused, then whispered, Okay. And this time, when he leaned in, she met him halfway. The kiss wasn't urgent, it was steady, gentle, like two people promising not to rush what already felt infinite. When they pulled apart, neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. Back inside, Clara found something tucked inside her grandmother's old recipe box, a silver hairpin. Lily-shaped? She held it in her palm for a long moment, then, without speaking, turned to Victor and placed it in his hand. She used to wear this every time she spoke in public. He studied it, eyes soft. Clara smiled. I think she'd be okay with me giving it to you. He looked up, surprised. To me? She nodded. Because I think you're finally ready to speak your truth, too. Clara hadn't heard that voice in over 17 years. But the moment she opened the front door of the little house with the blue door and saw her standing there, hair dyed too black, eyes lined too dark, and mouth curled in that same bitter half-smile, every part of her remembered. Hello, Clara, her mother. Victor had gone into town for coffee and bread, giving Clara space to say goodbye to the ghosts, as he'd put it with a wink. But he hadn't expected this ghost. Neither had Clara. Her breath caught in her throat, hand still on the doorknob. Why are you here? I saw your name in the paper, her mother said, stepping past the threshold without waiting. Victor Langston's Mystery Girl. I figured I'd see for myself. She walked around the living room like it belonged to her. It didn't. Not anymore. You still keep everything neat, just like Mom. God, that used to drive me crazy. Clara crossed her arms. What do you want? Her mother paused at the mantel, picked up the picture of young Clara and her grandmother. Closure, maybe, Clara laughed. No? You want money? Her mother turned slowly. Excuse me? You didn't come for closure. You came because you saw a headline, connected some dots, and figured maybe this is your chance to walk back in, but not as the woman who left. As the woman who discovered her daughter was successful. A pause. I'm not angry, Clara added, her voice steadier than she expected. I just don't owe you anything. Her mother looked like she'd been slapped. I gave birth to you, and my grandmother raised me. Just then, Victor returned. The screen door creaked open, and he froze when he saw them. Am I interrupting? Her mother turned to him, smile flickering on like a bulb. You must be the boyfriend. Clara didn't correct her. Victor stepped inside, placed the bag on the counter, and walked toward Clara. But his eyes never left the woman in the room. "You look like your father," she said to him. Victor didn't flinch. "I was told I look like my mother." Her mother blinked, then smirked. "Touché." Victor turned to Clara, gentle now. "You okay?" Clara nodded. Then, softly, "She was just leaving." Outside, the woman paused on the porch. "Your grandmother loved you," she said, not facing Clara. "She thought I was broken. Maybe I was." Clara said nothing. Her mother looked back, eyes glassy. "I don't know how to fix any of it." Clara stepped into the doorway, the locket visible over her heart. "I do," she said quietly. "You don't start with apologies, you start with presence. And you don't ask to be in someone's life. You earn your way back." Her mother nodded slowly. Then walked down the steps and disappeared into the sunset haze. Victor wrapped his arms around Clara from behind as she watched her mother go. "She won't come back," she said. "She might," he murmured. Clara tilted her head. "Would you forgive her?" Victor kissed her temple. "I'd forgive her for leaving." Not for pretending she didn't. That night, they drove back to the city in silence. But it was a different kind of silence. Comfortable, shared. They arrived back at Victor's penthouse around midnight, and when Clara stepped into the elevator and looked at him, messy-haired, tired-eyed, she saw something different. Not the CEO, the man beneath. The next morning, everything changed. Victor walked into Langston & Wells holding Clara's hand, not as a performance, not as a gesture, but as truth. Elizabeth was waiting in the front lobby, radiant in a dove-gray shawl and soft pink lipstick. Elena stood beside her, not bitter this time, just observant. Victor turned to Clara and whispered, "Are you ready?" She nodded. Then he stepped up to the small podium set for the press event. And for the first time in his corporate life, Victor Langston didn't speak about profit. He spoke about legacy. "My father left behind a name, a business, and a complicated story," he said to the small crowd of media, board members, and staff. "But I've decided to build a different ending." He glanced at Clara, who stood a few steps behind him, the locket gleaming under the lights. "My mother taught me silence could be powerful. Clara taught me it could also be kind." The room was breathless. "I'm not stepping down. I'm stepping forward and into a future that includes transparency, compassion, and a family that chooses each other, not just inherits each other." A pause. "And yes," he added with a smile, "this is the woman I love." Gasps, cameras clicking, whispers, but no scandal, just truth. Later in his office, he shut the door behind them. Clara turned to him. "You didn't have to say that," she whispered. "I wanted to," he said. "I needed to." He stepped closer, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out the silver lily hairpin she'd given him. "I made a decision," he said. He handed it to her. "I'm going to wear this every year on our gala night, as a promise." Clara took it gently, breath catching. "A promise of what?" He smiled. "To never stay silent when I should speak." Then he kissed her. Not gently this time, but fully, fiercely. Like a man who had finally stopped hiding from his own happiness. Clara kissed him back, hands on his chest, the locket between them like a heartbeat. Outside the glass office walls, no one whispered any more. They watched, and slowly smiled. Because sometimes a fairy tale doesn't start with a ball. It starts with a girl who said hello in silence, and a man who finally learned how to listen. A year later, the Langston estate looked different. The ballroom had been replaced by a garden, wild but curated, full of lavender, lilies, and benches under oak trees. The fountain had been cleaned and repaired. Clara had insisted. "I don't need chandeliers," she told Victor. "I need sky." So on a spring afternoon, beneath soft clouds and the gentle rustle of leaves, they were married. No paparazzi, no socialites, no performative aisle walks or choreographed toasts, just 60 chairs, chamomile tea, and a string quartet playing softly beneath ivy-covered trellises. Victor stood tall in a simple black suit with no tie. His silver lily pin glinted against the lapel, the same one Clara had given him in Greenville, now polished and worn proudly. Elizabeth sat in the front row, smiling through tears, the original silver locket pinned to her chest like a medal. She'd passed it back to Clara that morning with a simple sign: "It belongs to the one who listens." Clara wore an off-white dress, not traditional but timeless, her hair loose, no veil, just wildflowers tucked behind one ear, and in her hands, a folded letter. After the vows, simple words exchanged slowly without theatrics, Clara stepped forward and faced the guests. She unfolded the letter. "My grandmother wrote this to me," she said gently. "I found it a week after she passed. I was 19. I've never read it out loud. Until now." Her voice didn't shake. It simply carried. "Clara, if you're reading this, it means life has finally slowed down long enough for you to listen again. You were always quiet, not because you lacked words, but because you knew the world didn't always deserve them. One day, someone will listen to you, not just hear you, but truly listen. When they do, don't be afraid to speak. Love doesn't require noise, but it does require courage. I hope you find someone who knows the difference." Clara looked at Victor, then folded the letter and pressed it to her heart. Later, during the meal, they didn't serve lobster or duck confit. They served grilled cheese and tomato soup made exactly how Clara remembered from that night in Greenville, with shortbread cookies on each plate. Victor stood and raised his glass. "I always thought power was in what you build, your company, your name, your legacy." He looked at Clara. "Now I know. Power is in what you protect." After the meal, Helena approached quietly. She looked softer these days, still sharp, but gentler. She wore a navy jumpsuit and no makeup, her hair pulled back into a braid. Clara stood to meet her halfway. Helena extended a small box. "For you," she said, "from my mother." She passed in the fall. Clara opened it. Inside was a vintage fountain pen engraved with a single word: "Begin." Helena shrugged. She taught piano, but she always wanted to write a novel. Said if I ever met someone with enough grace to survive our family, I should pass it along. Clara's eyes misted. "Thank you," she whispered. Helena offered a half smile. "Write the kind of story we weren't given." That evening, just before the sun dipped below the trees, Victor led Clara to a quiet spot under the ivy archway. No cameras, no guests, just them. "I didn't give you a ring today," he said. She blinked. "Why not?" He pulled something small from his pocket. Not a ring box, a folded sheet of music. "It's a song my grandmother never finished," he said. "I found it in the old estate piano bench. I had it rewritten and arranged." He handed it to her. She called it Lily in the Rain. She wrote the melody the week she fell in love. But she never finished the last line. Clara's fingers traced the final bar. It was blank. Victor smiled. "Will you write the ending with me?" She nodded, too moved to speak. So instead she kissed him, soft, certain, final, and yet a beginning. They danced under the stars, alone, no music except the hum of the earth around them. When they finally returned to the house, Clara left her wedding dress folded over a chair. She changed into a cotton dress and bare feet, and sat at the writing desk by the window, the fountain pen in her hand. Victor came up behind her, kissed her shoulder, and whispered, "What are you writing?" She smiled. Something about a girl who spoke in silence, and the man who finally answered. He kissed her again, and said, "I know the ending." 5 years later, Clara Monroe Langston's debut novel, The Woman with the Blue Door, became a quiet bestseller, not because it was loud, but because it listened. It opened with a line she never forgot. "Kindness is not weakness. It is the legacy we leave behind when no one else is watching." And in every book she wrote after, there was a Lily somewhere, pressed between pages, left on windowsills, worn over hearts. Because sometimes the smallest thing, a smile, a sign, a shared meal, carry the loudest truth. The end. Would you have answered her in silence or waited for her to speak? What would you have done in Victor's place? Faced the ghosts or turned away? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story moved you even a little, give it a like. Leave a comment and rate it from 0 to 10. Thanks for being part of this fairy tale. See you in the next story.